Hello there. We are deviating from the norm again. Let's talk about my movie collection. I spend most of my leisure time either gaming or tinkering with hardware, but every so often I get the urge to watch a movie here and there. And yeah, I've got quite a few in my collection. This isn't necessarily a review or even like a tier list of which ones are my favorite. I just decided to do a random video today on my movie collection and just kind of show it off. I used to buy a ton of movies when I was in college, but now at 25 years old, it's getting a little harder to find time to do that. I do occasionally pick up a movie here and there every once in a while if it piques my interest. But yeah, I remember when I was in college, I was always browsing the DVD and Blu-ray section at basically any store that you can imagine. Target, Walmart, the likes. The way I collect movies is slightly different compared to the way that I collect video games. So when it comes to my video game collection, most of the time I stick to physical media because one, it's much easier to trade in, and two, it's most of the time for most consoles cheaper than buying it digital, unless of course the digital version is like miles cheaper than buying it physical, which in that case then I'll usually buy a digital game, or if that game is only available digitally. With movies, however, if I find a movie that I absolutely know I'm gonna love and watch over and over again, then I'll usually just straight up buy it on Blu-ray or DVD. But if it's a movie that comes out and it piques my interest, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm gonna watch it more than once, then I'll usually either watch it on streaming services when it comes out on there, or I just end up renting it on like Redbox or Amazon Prime Video. You'll notice right off the bat the majority of my movie collection is on the Blu-ray format. I have a couple DVDs in there, but basically I go for the Blu-rays first, and if it's only available on DVD, like especially for those like older releases, then I'll just get it on DVD instead. But for the most part, I always end up buying my movies either on Blu-ray or 4K Ultra HD. All right, let's start from the top of the stack. So right here we have the Dark Knight trilogy. This consists of the 3 Batman movies that were directed by Christopher Nolan back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. So there's Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises. I absolutely love Christopher Nolan's Batman movies. They are some of my favorite superhero movies of all time. I specifically remember to this day going to Batman Begins with my dad after a baseball game on the day that it released. I kid you not. And my jaw was on the floor the entire time. I'm like, holy crap, I did not know a superhero movie could be this good. And things just got so much better when they moved on to The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Just these are absolutely amazing movies. I highly recommend it. This Blu-ray box set also comes with a little booklet that dives more into the making of the Dark Knight trilogy, as well as some cool art from the movies and whatnot. It's a nice little addition. Oh boy. I could talk all day about Sharknado. I kid you not. I remember when this first came out on Sci-Fi Network. God, what was it? Like 2011, 2010 maybe? But they also replayed it a lot on Discovery Channel's Shark Week whenever they had that event going on. And yeah, it's one of those movies where you have to see it for yourself. It is like one of those like unbelievably It is so unbelievably terrible, but like in the best way possible. After this movie ended up becoming an infamous cult classic, they decided to capitalize on that and they made sequels. Way, way more sequels than they probably should have. But I haven't seen any of those other Sharknado movies. I've seen a little bit of Sharknado 2, but I think they're on like, what, 5 or 6 now? Yeah, so, yeah. So yeah, they knew that they couldn't stop after this first one. I definitely recommend this movie. If you love really, really bad movies as much as I do, this is a must-have. The Simpsons movie. Even if you're not a Simpsons fan, I definitely recommend giving this movie a watch because, I mean, it's The Simpsons. Come on. What's not to love? Oh, yeah. We got another stinker. So, the backstory behind the Red Line movie is a pretty interesting one. Basically, the director of this movie, Daniel Sadek, he used his own exotic car collection for this movie. And if that doesn't say that you just have a stupid amount of money to burn, I don't know what does. This movie's title was taken from the original prototype title for the Fast and Furious movie. And this movie takes a lot of inspiration from that movie. Except the execution is exactly what you expect. Pretty awful. Not only was this movie a monumental failure, but it's also pretty infamous for being funded by subprime loans from Daniel's own loan company that ended up closing their doors in the wake of the 2008 recession. I kid you not. I'm not even joking. I can't even make this shit up. That is just... I'm just speechless. Not only that, but they also ended up totaling an Enzo Ferrari at one of their promotional events for this movie. And that's not a very common car. That thing is extremely rare. And they just straight up just totaled it. Normally a movie this bad would not be worth having in anybody's collection. But the fact that it has such a ridiculous backstory, I know I just had to have it. So I ended up watching the Matrix trilogy for the first time a couple months ago, and I found this at a thrift store for a really cheap price. And I was like, you know what? Let's give it a try. I've never heard of the Animatrix before, but sure, why not? And I gotta say, it is actually a really, really interesting piece of media in the Matrix franchise. The Animatrix consists of 9 short films exploring the incredible world of the Matrix with a variety of different animation styles for each individual short film. It's really, really interesting. Normally, something like this wouldn't really be in my collection, but the fact this collection of short films has such an interesting style in a franchise that is just well known in the science fiction genre of movies. Yeah, it's definitely a good one to have. Nightmare Before Christmas. This movie is just an absolute masterpiece and one of Tim Burton's best movies ever. I was a little too young to watch it when it first came out, and I kid you not, I didn't end up watching it for the first time until I was an adult. But yeah, I end up watching this with my wife almost every single Halloween/Christmas. Yeah, it's a great movie, hence why I got it in my collection. Plus, it's also my wife's favorite movie ever, so that's also why. There's not really a whole lot of information online about this movie, but from what I've read, this is, I want to say it's a 2002 or 2003 DVD release of a 1999 Australian street racing movie called Redlined. Other than that, there's not really a whole lot of information about this movie. But one thing I can tell you, yeah, it's nothing special. It's pretty bad. The cinematography is okay, but everything else, especially the acting, is just laughably bad. Hence why it's in my collection. Right here, we got probably the most ridiculous comedy movie that I have in my collection, Tag. And as you can see, it's based on a true story. Yeah, that's right. They're not kidding. So the backstory behind this movie was there was a group of friends that grew up together, and they were like really, really into playing tag together, even up to like their adulthood. And they decided to make a movie about it. You would think making a movie about something so odd wouldn't be all that successful, but honestly, it works pretty well. It's not the best movie out there. It definitely has its flaws, but with a great cast to back it up, I think it holds its own pretty well. Speaking of weird comedies that ended up being really good, Game Night. This was another comedy release that released, I think, the same time as Tag. But basically the story is a group of friends have a tradition of playing board games together almost every single weekend. And one of the friends' brothers comes over and decides to organize a murder mystery party. And everything from there goes wrong in like the best way possible. Like I said about Tag, you would think something like this wouldn't work for a movie, but again, with an amazing cast and just amazing writing, it's a great movie. I definitely recommend it. Deadpool. What can be said about Deadpool that hasn't been said already? These are probably one of my favorite superhero movies ever. Just the writing, the casting is just all superb. Ryan Reynolds was like made for the Deadpool role. Like he plays that to a T. It's just absolutely absurd, absolutely gruesome. Just what else can be said? Deadpool is awesome. Duh. This one shouldn't surprise anybody considering I'm a huge tech nerd. Steve Jobs. So this is an autobiography movie starring Michael Fassbender, and it goes through 3 different eras of Steve Jobs. The beginning of the movie sees Steve Jobs at Apple when they were creating the first Apple Macintosh computer. And then the middle of the movie shows Steve Jobs where he left Apple and decided to create his own company called Next Computing. And then the last part of the movie is when he returns to Apple in 1998 and releases the iMac G3, that absolutely like recognizable all-in-one computer from the 90s that almost everybody knows. Is it really based on the real life of Steve Jobs? Some of it, but a majority of it is dramatized for entertainment purposes, obviously. But yeah, I think Michael Fassbender does a really, really good job of personifying Steve Jobs in this movie. It's pretty great. Tron Legacy. I didn't know it at the time when I first watched this, but Tron Legacy is actually a sequel to Tron that was released all the way back in the mid-'80s. And Tron is really special because at the time, the CGI that was used in that movie was like absolutely mind-blowing and just so revolutionary. And yeah, even 12 years later, Tron Legacy still looks absolutely beautiful, especially if you're watching in high definition. I remember seeing advertisements for this movie all the time when it was first coming out. And when I finally got to watch it, I didn't really feel anything about it. Do you ever just watch those movies where it's not really good, but it's not really bad either? It just sits somewhere in the realm between those two, and it's just one big eh. That's exactly what this movie is. One of the best parts about this movie is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was actually done by Daft Punk, and it's actually one of my favorite official soundtracks of any movie. I love me some thrillers, and Nightcrawler is definitely a good one. So I first watched this movie in college. I want to say it was for a sociology class, I want to say. It was kind of an odd thing to watch for a class like that. But if you watch the movie, you'll kind of understand. I never would have thought that I'd end up rewatching a movie that I had to watch for a class in college. But yeah, Nightcrawler is just something about it. I have watched this movie countless times, and I absolutely love it. It is one of Jake Gyllenhaal's best movies, in my opinion. Black Panther. Oh, yes. This is, I kid you not, one of my favorite Marvel movies ever. It is that good. It's just something about the writing and the characters and the story. It's just so incredibly interesting. It is unfortunate that Chadwick is no longer with us for the sequel to this movie, but if I'm being honest, this might have been one of his best movies that he was in. I absolutely love this movie. The Breakfast Club. I remember one of my friends in college always talked about it, and they said, it's really good, dude. You really got to watch it. It's a classic. And they weren't wrong. It's an absolutely amazing classic. Spider-Man does whatever a Spider-Man can. So yeah, the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies are some of the best that Marvel has ever made. I do think that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies are a little better. That might just because of nostalgic reasons, because I grew up with those. But yeah, the Spider-Man trilogy with Tom Holland is just absolutely amazing. Straight Outta Compton. This is a movie that I was actually really interested to see when it first came out. It was actually one of the very first R-rated movies I actually got to see when I turned 18. So this is another one of those autobiography movies about the infamous hip-hop group NWA. Just like Steve Jobs, some of the things about NWA in this movie were true, and other parts were just kind of edited / made up for this movie. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting movie, especially if you're a fan of old school hip hop. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So if you've been watching The Mandalorian or the new Andor series on Disney Plus, you might not have known, but all of these little side stories that Disney has been putting out for the Star Wars franchise all started right here with Rogue One. This movie basically takes place, I want to say, either during or before the events of the fall of the Death Star. And if I'm really being honest, this side movie is almost better than most of the other Star Wars movies recently. I kid you not. It's actually really, really good. It's surprisingly good, actually. I remember being really excited to watch Joker when it first came out. And when I finally watched it, it definitely left quite an impact on me. It's good, don't get me wrong. It's very, very good. I really enjoyed it. The premise of this movie, it's not for everybody, I will say. It is quite dark. And this movie will make you feel uncomfortable and very disturbed. Yeah, Not really much that you can say about it. Like I said, it's still a really, really good movie. They are making a sequel to this with Joaquin Phoenix coming back as the Joker, which I'm really interested to watch that. I have always loved the Pixar shorts that I would always watch before watching some of my favorite Pixar movies in theaters. And later on, they ended up releasing a DVD / Blu-ray box set collection of all of the Pixar shorts, all the way from the beginning to the present day. I know they're just silly little short films that they end up showing before the actual movie starts, but there's just something about these Pixar shorts that has stuck with me ever since I was little. It's just so charming. It's like, what's not to love? It's Pixar short films. They're great. Speaking of Pixar films, we got Toy Story. I kid you not, I watched this movie probably good 100 plus times growing up, maybe even more than that. And I kid you not, this is legit my favorite movie of all time. If I could watch this movie forever, I totally would. It left such a big impact on me growing up, and even now, I still find myself coming back to it a lot. I can't explain why exactly it's my favorite movie of all time. It just is. For being Pixar's very first feature-length CGI film, this movie was mind-blowing when it first came out. And even 27 years later, it has aged a little bit, but there's just still something timeless about this movie that this movie could be like 40 or 50 years old, and I would still watch it and absolutely love it. Got some more Marvel movies here. So I have 2 box set collections of some Marvel movies in my collection. I want to pick up the rest once they release more of those. And yeah, I know that all of the Marvel movies are on Disney Plus, and it's like the most convenient way to watch them, but I just prefer to have my Marvel movies on physical media. I just don't know why. But some of my favorite franchises in the Marvel cinematic universe are Iron Man and Avengers. I absolutely love these 2 series. And yeah, I will watch them countless times. Next up, we have 8 Mile. So this was the very first movie that Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, was starring in. And I gotta say, he does despite him being a well-known rapper, he actually does a really good job with acting. I remember watching this movie for the first time my freshman year in college and absolutely loved it. And even to this day, I still find myself watching it every once in a while. It's a fantastic movie. All right, last one, guys. So right here we have Nobody. This was kind of a strange release back in 2021. So most people know Bob O'Briek from the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul TV series. So when I saw him in this movie, it was honestly kind of strange, because I never would have thought Bob as an action hero sort of guy in a movie. This movie, as you can see right there, it's from the writers of John Wick, so it has a lot of inspiration from those movies. And while it's not as good as John Wick, it's pretty damn close. If you like John Wick, you're going to like this one. So there we go. There's my movie collection. You may or may not have found it interesting, but hey, if there's any movies that I should add to my collection, or if you have any thoughts about it, let me know in the comments below. So I think that's it. So yeah, I don't really know how to end this video, so bye.